Right now, as you watch this, somewhere out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a steel box the size of a small apartment is sliding through 20-foot swells at 15 knots, carrying 60,000 pounds of cargo with no crew watching it, no GPS beacon visible to the public. And yet the people who need to find it know exactly where it is, exactly what is inside it, and exactly when it will arrive. Not approximately, exactly. Down to the berth number and the crane that will unload it. That is not magic. That is not luck. That is a system so vast and so precisely engineered that it quietly underpins every object you have ever purchased that came from somewhere else. The sneakers on your feet, the screen you are watching this on, the coffee in your kitchen, every single one of them moved through this system inside one of 25 million containers, tracked by a code that most people have never heard of and fewer still understand. That code is called the BIC Container Identification System. And this is the story of how it came to be, how it works, and why the United States Navy considers it one of the most strategically important civilian systems on the planet. To understand the code, you have to understand the chaos that existed before it. Before containerization, loading a ship was a human nightmare. Dock workers, called longshoremen, would carry individual crates, barrels, sacks, and pallets onto vessels by hand. A single medium-sized cargo ship might require 3 weeks to load and another 3 weeks to unload. Theft was catastrophic. Damage was routine. Nobody had a reliable way to know what was where because the cargo changed shape every time someone repacked it. Then in 1956, a trucking entrepreneur named Malcolm McLean made a decision that changed the physical structure of global civilization. He put a standardized steel box onto a ship, the same box that had been on his truck. The same dimensions, the same corner fittings. Lifted off one, set onto the other, locked in place, and suddenly everything that was inside it was safe, contained, and theoretically trackable. But theoretically was the problem. By the 1960s, containerization had exploded. Shipping companies had hundreds of containers, then thousands, then tens of thousands. And each company was marking its own boxes in its own way. Some used colors, some used letters, some used numbers, some used both. When a container from one company ended up at a terminal operated by another company, the documentation was sometimes unreadable, sometimes missing, and sometimes simply wrong. The Navy was watching this with increasing alarm. By the early 1970s, American naval logistics depended on commercial shipping lanes in ways that were not publicly discussed. Military equipment, vehicle components, fuel infrastructure hardware, and support material all moved through civilian container systems. When the system was unreliable, military readiness suffered consequences that were measured in weeks and in lives. The Bureau International des Containers, the BIC, was tasked by international shipping bodies to solve the identification problem permanently. What they created was not complicated in its final form, but the mathematics behind it were designed to be essentially unforgeable and error-proof at scale. Every container on Earth now carries a 4-part code. The first element is the owner code, 3 capital letters identifying the company or entity that owns the container. These letters are registered with the BIC, and no two companies share the same code. There are currently over 10,000 registered owner codes in the system. The second element is the equipment category identifier, a single letter. For most freight containers the world over, this letter is U. If you see a container and the 4th character of the first sequence is U, you are looking at a freight container. J means it is attached equipment, something bolted to the container itself. Z means it is a trailer or chassis. That single letter tells port operators, crane operators, and naval supply officers the fundamental nature of what they are dealing with before they open a single door. The third element is the serial number, 6 digits, unique within the owner's fleet, and the 4th element is the one that makes the entire system work. It is called the check digit. The check digit is a single number, 0 through 9, that is mathematically derived from every other character in the container's code. When you take each letter and number in the owner code and serial number, assign them numerical values according to a specific table. Multiply each value by a power of 2 based on its position, sum all the results, divide by 11, and take the remainder, you arrive at the check digit. If the check digit on the physical container matches the check digit that the math produces, the code is valid. If it does not match, something has been misread, misstamped, or tampered with. At a modern port, Every container that passes through a gate is photographed by optical character recognition cameras that read the code, run the check digit calculation in milliseconds, and flag any anomaly instantly. A misread character produces a wrong check digit. A deliberately altered code produces a wrong check digit. A forged container identity almost always produces a wrong check digit, because to forge it convincingly requires knowing the calculation. And even those who know the calculation make errors at the speed of modern port operations. Naval security analysts at the Office of Naval Intelligence have described the check digit as one of the most quietly effective anti-tampering systems in non-military logistics. Not because it prevents tampering directly, but because it makes tampering visible. The strategic implications of this system extend far beyond knowing where a washing machine is. During Operation Desert Shield in 1990, the United States moved more equipment by sea in a shorter time than at any point since the Second World War. Over 500,000 personnel and their equipment had to cross the Atlantic and Indian Oceans and arrive at Saudi Arabian ports in functional condition and in the correct sequence. Equipment that arrived out of sequence was useless. Tanks without ammunition, artillery without fire control systems, vehicles without fuel trucks. The container identification system was the backbone of tracking that movement. When containers were scanned at departure, their contents were logged against their BIC codes. When they arrived, the codes were rescanned and matched. Discrepancies were investigated immediately. The system worked well enough that military planners began formally incorporating commercial container tracking into doctrine. But it also revealed a vulnerability. If an adversary understood the container identification system, they could potentially use it against American interests, not by attacking containers directly, but by flooding the system with false data, inserting containers with altered codes that would pass visual inspection but fail electronic verification, or exploiting the small percentage of codes that were not in compliance. The Navy's response was RFID, radio frequency identification tags, small electronic chips that transmit a unique identifier when queried by a reader, began appearing on military-adjacent cargo containers in the late 1990s. By the time of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, the Department of Defense had mandated RFID tagging for all containerized military cargo. The physical BIC code remained, stenciled on the steel in white paint, because the physical code was the universal language that every port in the world could read without special equipment. But the RFID tag added a second layer, a layer that could be queried without line of sight, from a distance, through walls and weather, and that could carry far more information than 11 characters painted on a box. Today, a high-value military container can carry a tag that transmits its BIC code, its contents manifest, its weight, its temperature, its seal status, and a log of every location it has been queried in an encrypted signal that only authorized receivers can decode. It is the same steel box that Malcolm McLean put on a ship in 1956. But now it carries a digital ghost of itself that the Navy can read from a pier without touching it. What does this mean for you? Watching from wherever you are. It means that the container system is not simply a logistics tool. It is an intelligence system. Every container that enters an American port is run against watch lists maintained by Customs and Border Protection, the Department of Homeland Security, and Naval Intelligence. The BIC code is cross-referenced against the ship's manifest, the country of origin, the registered owner, the declared contents, and a risk-scoring algorithm that weights all of those variables against known threat patterns. Most containers clear in seconds. A small percentage are flagged for additional screening. An even smaller percentage are physically opened, and the system is accurate enough that what is found in those opened containers continues to justify the entire architecture. In 2019, a container flagged by the automated BIC cross-reference system at a major East Coast port was found to contain components consistent with guidance system hardware on a controlled export list. The container code was valid, the check digit was correct, the manifest listed machine parts. The flag came from a discrepancy between the registered owner code and the ship's declared cargo origin, a mismatch that a human inspector might have missed that the algorithm caught in 0.3 seconds. 11 characters on a steel box. That is the secret code that tracks every container on Earth. And somewhere out in the Pacific right now, 25 million of them are moving. Every one of them speaking that code. and the system is listening to all of them at once.